close your eyes. Just for a moment. Let the world soften at the edges. Let the sounds around you, the hum of distant traffic, the creak of a floorboard, the rhythm of your breath, become background to something quieter, something deeper, the voice inside. There it is. Not loud, not always noticeable, but always present, a quiet commentator, narrating your experience. That's interesting. I should remember that. Why did I say that? I wonder what time it is. It speaks in your native tongue, in your tone, with your humor, your worries, your hopes. It feels so personal, so intimate, so you, that it's almost unthinkable to imagine yourself without it. And yet, what if this voice, this constant companion, is not actually you? What if it's not the thinker, but just another thought? Not the observer, but one of the things being observed? Not the pilot of the mind, but merely a passenger narrating the flight? This is the first uncomfortable truth we'll explore together. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness in which that voice arises. It's a subtle distinction, so subtle that most of us never notice it. We spend our lives assuming that the voice is the self, the central I that makes decisions, remembers the past, fears the future, loves, regrets, plans. But if you listen closely, with patience and without judgment, you may begin to see something startling. Thoughts appear on their own. They bubble up from silence, fully formed, without your permission, without your invitation. And the voice simply reports them. Imagine you're sitting by a river. The water flows gently, carrying leaves downstream. Some are bright green, some turning gold, some dark and rotting. They drift past, one after another, never stopping, never repeating. Now imagine that each leaf is a thought, a memory, a worry, a fantasy, a sudden insight. You don't reach into the water and place each leaf there. You don't decide which one comes next. They just appear, carried by unseen currents beneath the surface. And yet, you say, I am thinking. As if you planted each leaf. As if you directed the flow. But who is the I watching the leaves? Who is the one noticing? That's the real question. Because the voice says, I think, therefore I am, echoing Descartes. But what if it's wrong? What if the voice isn't the one doing the thinking? What if it's just the one saying it's thinking? Let that sink in. You don't choose your next thought any more than you choose your next heartbeat. You don't decide to remember your third-grade teacher, or suddenly crave chocolate, or worry about a conversation from 2 weeks ago. These thoughts arrive unbidden, like guests at a door you didn't open. And the voice? It just turns to you and says, hey, look, I'm thinking about chocolate. As if it had anything to do with it. This is not a poetic metaphor. It's a direct observation, one that has been made independently by neuroscientists, philosophers, and meditators across centuries and cultures. From the ancient Buddhist insight of anatta, not self, to the modern cognitive science of the narrative self, the conclusion is the same: the inner voice is not the author of your experience. It is a narrator, a commentator, a storyteller, but not the source. Let's pause here, for just a moment. Now, ask yourself, where do thoughts come from? Not what you're thinking, that's easy. But where do the thoughts originate? Can you trace them back to a place inside you? Can you feel yourself creating them, like a writer crafting a sentence? Or do they simply appear, fully formed, in the space of your mind? Most people, when they really look, find that thoughts arise spontaneously. They emerge from silence, from darkness, from somewhere beyond conscious control. And the voice? It just labels them. It gives them meaning. It says, this is mine. This is me. But that's an assumption, not a fact. This is where the discomfort begins. Because if you're not the voice, then who or what are you? We spend our lives building an identity around that voice. We say, I am kind, I am anxious, I am smart, I am broken. We defend it, feed it, punish it, praise it. We build relationships based on what the voice tells us about ourselves and others. We spend decades trying to make it happy, quiet, confident, successful. But what if it's not even yours? What if the voice is just a function of the brain, a kind of mental reflex, like blinking or breathing, that evolved to help you navigate the world, not to represent the truth of who you are? Modern neuroscience supports this view. Brain imaging studies have shown that the regions associated with self-referential thought, particularly the default mode network, light up when we're lost in thought, ruminating, planning, or remembering. This network is often called the narrative engine of the mind. It's active when we're not focused on a task, when we're daydreaming, worrying, or constructing stories about ourselves. But here's the key insight: this network is not the self. It creates the illusion of one. Think of it like a film editor in a dark room, cutting together footage from different cameras, memory, emotion, sensation, into a coherent story. The editor doesn't live the events. They weren't there. They just assemble the clips into a narrative that makes sense. And when the movie plays, you assume there's a main character, you, at the center of it all. But the character is fictional. The continuity is manufactured. The plot is retrospective. This is what psychologists call the narrative self, a post hoc construction that gives us the feeling of being a consistent, enduring I over time. But it's not a thing. It's a process. And like all processes, it can break down. Consider people with certain brain injuries or psychological conditions. Some stroke patients lose the ability to speak but retain full awareness, and report that their inner voice is gone, yet they are still there. Others with schizophrenia hear voices that feel alien, intrusive, not their own, yet still recognize themselves as the one hearing them. In deep meditation, experienced practitioners often report the temporary disappearance of the inner voice, not as loss, but as relief. The chatter stops. The self-story dissolves. And what remains? A quiet, spacious awareness, alert, present, undisturbed. In all these cases, the voice vanishes, but you don't. So who are you, when the voice is silent? This leads us to a radical possibility: awareness is primary. The voice is secondary. You are not the thought. You are not the thinker. You are the space in which thoughts appear. This is not philosophy for the sake of cleverness. It's an invitation to a deeper relationship with your own mind, one that can bring profound relief, clarity, and peace. Because here's the truth: the voice in your head is not your friend. Oh, it pretends to be. It warns you of danger, plans for the future, reminds you of your values. But it also lies. It catastrophizes. It compares. It judges. It replays old wounds. It imagines futures that will never happen. It tells you you're not enough, not safe, not loved. And because you believe it's you, you take it personally. You suffer because you think the voice's opinions are your reality. But what if you're not responsible for the voice? What if it's just a mental habit, like a reflexive flinch or an automatic breath? When you realize this, something shifts. You begin to witness the voice instead of being it. You hear it say, "I'm such a failure," and instead of collapsing into shame, you notice, there's the failure story again. It's back. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to fight it. You don't even have to stop it. You just let it pass, like a leaf on the river. This is the beginning of freedom. And it starts with a simple question: who is listening? Because the voice speaks, but something, or someone, hears it. That listener is not the voice. It's deeper. It's quieter. It's always been there, beneath the noise. This is why so many contemplative traditions, from Zen to Advaita Vedanta to mindfulness, emphasize watching the mind rather than obeying it. They don't try to silence the voice, though that may happen. They teach you to disidentify with it. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your memories. You are the awareness that contains them. Let that settle. Now, consider this: the voice doesn't just comment on your present experience, it constructs your sense of identity. It tells you who you are based on the past. I'm the kind of person who messes up. I've always been anxious. I'm a good listener. These are not facts. They are stories, patterns of thought that have repeated so often they feel true. But they are not you. You are not the story. You are the one who can notice the story. And if you can notice it, then you are not trapped by it. This has profound implications. If the self is not a fixed entity but a fluid narrative, then it can be changed. Not by arguing with the voice, but by shifting your relationship to it. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop believing the story so completely. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you've been acting in a play, a long, elaborate drama, and you forgot it was fiction. You took your role so seriously that you started to believe it was real. You felt the character's pain as your own, celebrated their victories, feared their enemies. But now, you remember, I am not the character. I am the actor. And the actor can step out of the role. They can rest. They can choose a new script. That's what this realization offers, the possibility of choice, not in controlling your thoughts, but in how you relate to them. You don't have to be at war with your mind. You don't have to silence it. You just have to stop mistaking it for you. This is why this truth is so uncomfortable and so liberating. It's uncomfortable because it undermines everything we've built our lives on: our identity, our sense of control, our belief in free will. If the voice isn't the decider, then who is? If the self is a story, then what's real? But it's liberating because it frees you from the burden of being someone. You don't have to maintain the image. You don't have to defend the past. You don't have to fear the future. You can simply be, not as a character, but as awareness itself. And in that space, there is peace. Not the peace of having all the answers. Not the peace of a quiet mind. But the peace of knowing who you are, beneath the noise. Let's return to the river. The leaves keep drifting. Thoughts come and go. The voice comments, that one was sad. That one was creative. I wish I could stop thinking. But now, you don't jump in to catch the leaves. You don't chase them downstream. You don't judge them. You just sit, quietly, patiently, watching. And in that watching, something extraordinary happens. The voice begins to lose its authority. It's still there. It still speaks. But it no longer commands. It's just another sound in the mind's theater, like the wind in the trees, or the distant bark of a dog. And you? You are the silence in which all sounds arise. You are the stillness beneath the storm. You are the awareness that was here before the first thought, and will remain after the last. This is not enlightenment. It's not a destination. It's a simple, ever-present fact, one that we spend our lives overlooking because we're too busy listening to the voice that says, I am. But now, you know better. You are not the voice. You are the one who hears it. And in that knowing, quiet, unshakable, and deep, there is rest. So as we prepare to move forward, into the next uncomfortable truth, take a slow breath. Let the voice whisper its stories. And behind it, beneath it, beyond it, rest in the awareness that needs no words. Because if the voice isn't really you, then what is making the decisions? That brings us to one of the most disturbing findings in neuroscience, one that quietly dismantles our deepest belief in control. Let's drift now into the silence before awareness, into the moment before you knew what you would do. Imagine a quiet room. A single chair. A small red button on the table in front of you. No pressure. No urgency. Just a simple instruction: whenever you feel the urge, press the button with your right hand. It's entirely up to you, no right or wrong time. Just act when you decide to act. You sit there, relaxed. The moment feels ordinary. You wait. And then, it happens. A subtle impulse arises. Not forced, not planned. Just a quiet sense of readiness. You think to yourself, now. I'll press it now. And so you do. Your finger moves. The button clicks. In that instant, you feel something profound, the sensation of making a choice. It feels clear, deliberate, self-initiated. You didn't have to do it. No one told you to. But you chose to. And in that choice, you feel the essence of what it means to be free, to be a conscious agent in the world, capable of directing your own actions. But what if I told you that this moment, this feeling of free will, was an illusion? Not a lie, not a trick, but a carefully constructed narrative, generated after the fact by your mind to make sense of what your brain had already done? What if, at the very moment you thought, I choose now, your brain had already set the motion in motion, silently, automatically, without your knowledge, up to 7 seconds earlier? This is not science fiction. It is not speculation. It is the quiet, unsettling conclusion of decades of neuroscience, beginning with one of the most controversial experiments in the history of psychology, the Libet experiment. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a deceptively simple study that would ripple through philosophy, ethics, and our deepest understanding of human agency. He asked volunteers to do exactly what you imagined: press a button whenever they felt the urge. But he added 2 crucial tools. First, an EEG cap to measure electrical activity in the brain. Second, a rapidly rotating clock on a screen, so participants could later report, with millisecond precision, the exact moment they became aware of their decision to move. What Libet discovered stunned the scientific community. Before participants reported the conscious intention to act, that inner now moment, their brains had already shown a measurable surge of activity. This signal, known as the readiness potential, Bereitschaftspotential in German, began approximately 500 milliseconds, half a second, before the person felt they had made the decision. Let that sink in. Your brain begins preparing your body to act before you are consciously aware of wanting to act. The implication is staggering: the decision is made unconsciously. The feeling of I chose arrives afterward, like a caption on a video that's already playing. You are not the author of the action. You are the audience. And yet, the experience feels so real. So immediate. So voluntary. How could it be an illusion? To understand this, we must first consider what the readiness potential actually is. It's not the decision itself, not in the way we normally think of decisions. It's a slow, unconscious buildup of neural activity in the motor cortex, a kind of preparatory hum that primes the body for movement. It's the brain's way of saying, get ready. Something might happen. But Libet's genius was in showing that this preparation consistently precedes the subjective experience of will. Later studies, using more advanced tools like fMRI, confirmed and deepened this finding. In 2008, a team led by Chun Seong-soon at the Max Planck Institute designed an even more rigorous version of the experiment. Participants were asked to choose, at their own pace, whether to press a button with their left or right hand. The fMRI machine scanned their brains continuously. The results were even more unsettling. Researchers could predict which hand a person would choose, with up to 60% accuracy, a full 7 seconds before the participant reported any conscious awareness of the decision. 7 seconds. That's longer than the average pop song chorus. Longer than the time it takes to tie your shoes. And in that span, deep within the folds of your brain, a choice was being formed, not by you, but by unconscious processes operating beneath the level of awareness. Now, this doesn't mean the brain is making complex moral decisions in advance, like whether to betray a friend or donate to charity. These experiments focus on simple, spontaneous actions, pressing a button, flicking a finger. But even in these minimal choices, the pattern holds: consciousness arrives late to the scene. So what is consciousness doing, if not deciding? One possibility, proposed by Libet himself, is that consciousness has a veto power. While the unconscious brain may initiate actions, consciousness can still stop them. You might feel the urge to reach for a cigarette, your brain already priming the motion, but at the last moment, you say, no. That pause, that interruption, may be where free will truly resides, not in initiation, but in inhibition. This is a comforting thought. It suggests that even if we don't start the action, we can still stop it. We are not helpless passengers. We can reject the impulses that arise. But is this enough to save free will? Because even the veto, the no, would have to arise from somewhere. If the decision to act begins unconsciously, why should the decision not to act be any different? Perhaps the veto is also prepared in advance, and the feeling of resisting the urge is just another retrospective story. This leads us into a deeper, more unsettling territory: the self as a narrator, not a commander. Think of your conscious mind as a journalist embedded in your brain. It doesn't run the operation. It doesn't issue orders. But it observes what's happening and writes a report: the body moved because I decided to move it. It creates a coherent story, a cause and effect narrative, to explain behavior that was already in motion. This is essential for survival. A brain that could not generate a sense of agency would be disoriented, unable to learn from experience or plan for the future. So the story of I did this is not a flaw, it's a feature. It stabilizes identity. It allows for responsibility. It makes social life possible. But it may not be true. And this is where the discomfort begins. Because if we are not the authors of our actions, then what are we? Are we merely passengers in a biological machine, watching a movie of our lives unfold, a movie our brain is both producing and narrating? This idea strikes at the core of how we understand ourselves. We build our legal systems on the assumption that people choose to commit crimes. We praise heroes for their courage, artists for their creativity, parents for their sacrifice, all based on the belief that they could have done otherwise. But if the brain decides before awareness, then could they? Consider a man who lashes out in anger, striking someone in a moment of rage. The law may consider intent, but neuroscience suggests that the neural cascade leading to that punch began long before he felt the decision to throw it. His emotions, his memories, his stress levels, his biology, all shaped the outcome before consciousness had a say. Is he responsible? Or is he, like all of us, the inheritor of a vast, invisible network of causes, genetic, environmental, neurological, that shaped his actions before he was even aware of them? This doesn't mean we should abolish justice. Society needs boundaries. Harm must be addressed. But it does suggest that blame, the moral judgment that someone should have known better, may be misplaced. Not because people don't act, but because the they who act may not be the they we imagine. Philosopher Sam Harris puts it starkly, you can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide. The chain of causality stretches backward into the past, into factors you never chose, your genes, your upbringing, the food you ate, the temperature in the room. You are not the origin of your thoughts. You are not the source of your desires. You are not the author of your urges. You are the one who experiences them. In that experience, the feeling of agency is a construction. A useful fiction. This is not a new idea. Eastern philosophies have long taught that the ego is an illusion. In Buddhism, the doctrine of anatta, not self, suggests that there is no permanent, unchanging I-making decisions. In Advaita Vedanta, the self is seen as a reflection of a deeper, impersonal awareness. But now, neuroscience is arriving at a similar conclusion, not through meditation, but through electrodes and brain scans. And yet, life still feels voluntary. You can choose to stop watching this video. You can stand up, walk away, drink water, call a friend. These actions feel deliberate. You can reflect on your habits, change your routines, resist temptation. You can spend years transforming yourself, quitting smoking, learning a language, healing a relationship. If free will is an illusion, how is any of this possible? This is the paradox at the heart of the debate. One way to resolve it is to redefine free will, not as the ability to act outside of cause and effect, but as the ability to act in alignment with your deeper values, without coercion. In this view, you don't have libertarian free will, the kind that could have done otherwise in an identical universe, but you do have compatibilist free will, the capacity to make decisions based on reasons, desires, and reflection, even if those are shaped by prior causes. You are not free from the universe, but you are free within it. And that freedom, the freedom to reflect, to learn, to grow, is real, even if it emerges from unconscious processes. Another possibility is that consciousness plays a longer-term role, even if it doesn't initiate individual actions. While your brain may decide to press a button a half-second early, your conscious mind shapes your habits, your goals, your environment, all of which influence future unconscious decisions. In other words, you may not choose the individual notes, but you compose the song. You train your brain through repetition, intention, and discipline. You create conditions in which certain impulses are more likely to arise, and others, less so. Over time, this gives you a kind of indirect control. But still, the moment of choice, the now, remains elusive. Take a slow breath. Feel your chest rise. Feel your lungs fill. Did you decide to breathe that way? Or did the breath happen on its own, guided by automatic systems? Now, try to stop breathing. Hold it. You can do it, for a while. But eventually, the unconscious brain will override you. It will force air in, no matter what you want. Even here, in something as fundamental as breathing, your control is temporary, conditional, and ultimately subject to deeper forces. So what does this mean for the self? If the voice in your head isn't the thinker, and the conscious will isn't the decider, then what, or who, is in charge? Perhaps no one is. Perhaps the mind is not a monarchy, with a single ruler giving orders. Perhaps it is a democracy, or even a marketplace, where countless neural processes compete for attention, and the one that wins gets labeled as my decision after the fact. Your brain is not a single entity. It is a society of agents, each with its own goals: the hunger module, the fear module, the social bonding module, the curiosity module. They negotiate, they conflict, they cooperate, and consciousness receives the outcome as a unified decision. You don't decide to eat chocolate because you want it. You eat because the craving module won the internal vote. And the voice says, I wanted it. But did you? This realization can be deeply unsettling. It threatens our sense of autonomy, our pride, our moral identity. We want to believe we are the heroes of our own stories, the ones who overcome temptation, who choose love over fear, who build meaning from chaos. And yet, the evidence suggests that the hero is a character in a story written by the brain. But here's a strange comfort: none of this changes what it feels like to be you. You still suffer. You still love. You still create. You still strive. The illusion is not a flaw, it is the medium through which life is lived. And perhaps freedom was never about being the first cause. Perhaps it was always about awareness. What if freedom isn't in the decision, but in the recognition that a decision is being made? What if the space between impulse and action, that tiny gap where you can notice what's arising, is where true agency lies? You may not choose the thought, but you can choose whether to act on it. You may not control the weather of the mind, but you can learn to stand in the storm without being swept away. And in that awareness, fragile, fleeting, but real, there is a kind of freedom. Not freedom from causality, but freedom within it. So as we sit here, in the quiet aftermath of this revelation, let the implications settle. You are not the voice. You are not the decision maker. But you are the one who can see this. And that seeing, that quiet, witnessing presence, may be the closest thing we have to freedom. And yet, awareness still arrives late. It observes the decision, but it doesn't initiate it. Which raises a deeper mystery: why is there awareness at all? Why aren't you just a robot, processing data, reacting to stimuli, efficient, adaptive, but dark inside? Why does any of this feel like anything? Let's now enter the deepest puzzle in science, the one no equation has yet solved. Imagine a scientist, brilliant, relentless, devoted to understanding the mind. She has spent her life mapping the brain in perfect detail. She knows the exact number of neurons in the visual cortex, 140 million. She can trace the path of a photon from the moment it strikes the retina, through the optic nerve, into the thalamus, and finally to the occipital lobe, where it triggers a cascade of electrochemical signals. She has modeled every neurotransmitter involved in emotion: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and can predict with uncanny accuracy how a person will react to joy, grief, or fear. Her simulations of human thought are so advanced that they pass every behavioral test of consciousness. Machines built on her research speak, write poetry, recognize faces, and even claim to feel. But there is one thing she has never known. She has never seen red. Not in the way you have. Not as a sensation. Not as a color that floods your awareness with warmth, that reminds you of autumn leaves, of a lover's lips, of a warning light flashing in the dark. She knows the wavelength, 650 nanometers. She knows the frequency. She knows which neurons fire when the eye detects it. She can describe the entire biological process with flawless precision. But she has never experienced it. Now imagine this: one day, she steps out of her lab, and for the first time, her eyes open to the world in full color. A red flower blooms before her. And in that moment, something happens that no amount of data could prepare her for. She gasps. Tears well up. She whispers, "So that's what it's like." In that instant, she gained something no scientific model could give her: subjective experience. This is the heart of what philosopher David Chalmers named the hard problem of consciousness, a phrase that, despite its simplicity, cuts deeper into the mystery of existence than perhaps any other idea in modern thought. It asks not how the brain processes information, but why any of it feels like anything at all. Why isn't all of this, the sight of stars, the taste of salt, the ache of loneliness, happening in the dark, without a witness? We can explain the functions of the mind, how the brain recognizes a face, stores a memory, or plans a route. These are the easy problems of neuroscience, not because they're simple, but because they can be addressed through observation, measurement, and mechanism. But the hard problem is different. It resists all such methods. Because no matter how much we learn about neurons, synapses, and neural networks, we still cannot explain why there is a light on inside. This is the gap, vast, silent, and profound, between objective process and subjective experience. Between the brain as a biological machine and the mind as a living, feeling presence. To understand just how deep this problem runs, consider a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Frank Jackson, Mary the color scientist. Mary is a genius who knows everything there is to know about color vision. She has never seen color herself. She lives in a black and white room, sees the world through a monochrome screen, but her knowledge is complete. She understands the physics of light, the biology of the eye, the neurology of perception. She could give a flawless lecture on why sunsets appear red and skies appear blue. One day, the door opens. She steps outside. She sees a blue sky for the first time. Does she learn something new? Intuitively, yes. She learns what it's like to see blue. No amount of factual knowledge could have given her that. She didn't lack information, she lacked experience. And that experience, the qualia of blue, the ineffable blueness of blue, is what the hard problem is about. Qualia, from the Latin quali, meaning what kind, are the subjective qualities of conscious experience. The redness of red. The sourness of lemon. The warmth of a hand in yours. They are private, first-person phenomena. You cannot measure them with a ruler or photograph them with a camera. You cannot transmit them directly to another mind. The best you can do is point and say, this is what it's like. And yet, they are the very fabric of your existence. Every moment of your life is made of qualia. Without them, there would be no joy, no pain, no beauty, no love. There would only be a silent, unfeeling mechanism, a zombie that acts as if it's alive, but is not. And this is the central puzzle. Why should a lump of matter, a 3-pound mass of wet tissue, give rise to inner life at all? From the outside, the brain looks like any other organ. It metabolizes glucose, responds to stimuli, maintains homeostasis. But from the inside, from your inside, it is the seed of the universe. A single human mind contains galaxies of memory, oceans of emotion, constellations of thought. How does this happen? We can trace the neural correlates of consciousness, the patterns of brain activity that accompany awareness, but correlation is not explanation. Knowing that a certain region lights up when you see red doesn't tell us why that lighting up should come with a sensation. It's as if we discovered that a radio plays music when electricity flows through it, but couldn't explain why there's sound, only circuits. This is why the hard problem is so stubborn. It resists reduction. You cannot break consciousness down into smaller parts and reassemble it, the way you can with a clock. You cannot say, here is a neuron that feels sad, or this synapse tastes chocolate. Consciousness doesn't live in the parts, it emerges in the whole, in a way we do not understand, and this leads to a radical possibility. Consciousness may not be produced by the brain at all. Perhaps it is not an emergent property, like heat from a fire, but a fundamental feature of reality, like space, time, or gravity. Just as mass warps spacetime, perhaps certain configurations of matter allow consciousness to manifest, not because they create it, but because they tune into it. This is the idea behind panpsychism, the view that consciousness, or proto-consciousness, is a basic ingredient of the universe, present even in the smallest particles. Not that electrons are thinking, but that they possess a rudimentary form of experience, a tiny spark of subjectivity, that, when organized in complex systems like brains, gives rise to the rich inner world we know. It sounds bizarre. But consider this, we already accept that matter has intrinsic properties, mass, charge, spin, that cannot be reduced to anything more basic. Why not add experience to that list? Philosopher Galen Strawson puts it this way: the idea that experience arises from non-experiential matter is the craziest idea in the history of human thought. If everything else in physics is built on fundamental properties, why should consciousness be the one thing that magically appears out of nowhere? Panpsychism avoids that leap. It suggests that consciousness was always there, woven into the fabric of reality, and that brains don't generate it so much as concentrate it, like a lens focusing light. Another possibility is even more unsettling: we are in a simulation. If the universe is a vast computational system, a simulation run by a higher intelligence or future civilization, then qualia might be part of the rendering engine. Just as a video game generates visuals and sound for the player, the simulation generates subjective experience for the conscious agents within it. In this view, consciousness is not a biological accident, but a designed feature, a way for the simulation to feel itself. This idea, while speculative, gains traction in an age where we are beginning to simulate complex worlds ourselves. If we can create virtual beings with apparent awareness, could we not also be someone else's creation? Or perhaps consciousness is not fundamental, not simulated, but simply an evolutionary accident, a flashlight turned on in a vast, unconscious universe. A brief, flickering awareness that emerged by chance, with no deeper purpose, no cosmic significance. A momentary spark in the dark. This is the materialist view, that consciousness is a byproduct of complexity, like foam on a wave. Brains evolved to process information efficiently, and awareness just came along for the ride, a kind of evolutionary user interface that helps organisms navigate the world. But even this view struggles with the hard problem. Why should efficiency require experience? A superintelligent AI could outperform humans in every task without feeling a thing. So why did evolution bother with qualia? Unless awareness itself has a function we don't yet understand. Some researchers suggest that consciousness integrates information, that it binds disparate sensory inputs into a unified field of experience, allowing for coherent action. This is the core of integrated information theory, IIT, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. According to IIT, the more integrated a system's information is, the more conscious it is. A human brain is highly integrated, a thermostat is not. But again, this explains correlates, not causes. It tells us what kind of systems are conscious, but not why integration should give rise to feeling. And so we circle back to the mystery. Because no matter how far we push science, we hit a wall. Subjective experience cannot be observed from the outside. You can scan my brain, record my neural activity, even predict my behavior, but you will never know what it's like to be me. That inner world is locked behind a door only I can open, and even I can't fully describe it. This is what makes consciousness so deeply personal, and so deeply isolating. We assume others are conscious because they act like us. They flinch when hurt, smile when happy, cry when grieving. But there is no test for qualia. No machine can measure the taste of strawberries. No brain scan can confirm that someone truly feels love. For all we know, everyone else could be a philosophical zombie, identical in behavior, but empty inside. And that thought, that you might be the only conscious being in a world of automatons, is one of the most haunting implications of the hard problem. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: consciousness may not belong to the brain at all. Some ancient and mystical traditions, from Advaita Vedanta to certain schools of Buddhism, suggest that consciousness is not generated by the body, but is the fundamental ground of reality. The brain does not produce awareness, it limits it. Like a prism that breaks white light into colors, the brain filters infinite consciousness into the narrow band of human experience. In deep meditation, near-death experiences, or psychedelic states, people often report a dissolution of the self, emerging with something vast, timeless, boundless. They say, "I was everywhere. I was everything. I was no one." These are not hallucinations in the dismissive sense, they are experiences that challenge the very assumption that consciousness is confined to the skull. And if that's true, then death may not be the end of awareness, only the end of its filter. But for now, we remain in the mystery. We live in a universe where matter somehow gives rise to mind. Where silence becomes song. Where darkness becomes light. And we have no idea how. So let this question linger, like a note held in the air after the music stops. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Science says yes, sound is vibration, independent of perception. But the hard problem asks a deeper question. If no one is there, does silence even exist? Because silence, like sound, is not just a physical phenomenon. It is an experience. A quality of awareness. And without a mind to perceive it, can it be said to be? Perhaps the universe does not exist without a witness. Perhaps consciousness is not a latecomer to the cosmos, but its silent foundation. And if consciousness is so mysterious, so fundamental, so fragile, what happens when it fractures? When the mind turns against itself, distorting reality, dissolving identity, revealing that even sanity is a delicate illusion? Let's now peer into the cracks of the self, into the illusion of identity. There's a moment most of us have known, subtle, fleeting, but unforgettable. You're standing in front of a mirror, or hearing a recording of your voice, or reading an old journal entry, and something shifts. A quiet dissonance. A flicker of unfamiliarity. Is that really me? It might come after a breakup, when the version of yourself that existed within the relationship feels like a costume you've outgrown. Or after a sudden insight in meditation, when the usual chatter of the mind pauses, and for a breath, there's no you at all, just silence, presence, and a strange sense of absence. Or in grief, when the person you thought you were, the one who laughed easily, who believed in the future, seems like a ghost from another life. In that moment, you feel it, I'm not the same person I was. But what if the deeper truth is even more radical? What if you've never been a person at all, not in the way we usually mean it? Not a fixed, enduring entity with a core identity, a stable essence, a soul like I that persists through time. What if, instead, you are something far more fluid, far more fragile, a story? A narrative constantly being written, edited, and rewritten by your brain, moment by moment, shaped by memory, emotion, expectation, and the desperate need to feel like you are one coherent thing? This is not a metaphor. It is not poetic license. It is a conclusion drawn from neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, one that dismantles our most cherished assumption about who we are. You are not a substance. You are a process. You are not a noun. You are a verb. And the you believe yourself to be, the central character in the drama of your life, is a fiction. A useful, necessary, brilliantly constructed fiction. But a fiction nonetheless. To understand this, let's begin with a strange phenomenon, confabulation. Neurologist Vilayana Ramachandran, in his work with patients who have suffered brain damage, observed something astonishing. When asked why they behaved a certain way, for example, why they moved their left hand when instructed to move their right, some patients would invent elaborate, entirely false explanations. One man, whose left hand was paralyzed due to a stroke, was asked to raise it. He couldn't. When asked why, he said, "Oh, I'm not ready yet. I'll do it when I feel like it." Another patient, whose brain could no longer recognize his own mother, insisted she was an imposter, a perfect replica sent to trick him. These weren't lies. The patients believed what they were saying. Their brains were not deceiving others, they were deceiving themselves. This is confabulation, the brain's automatic tendency to fill in gaps with plausible stories, even when the truth is unknown or inaccessible. It reveals something profound: the mind cannot tolerate inconsistency. It must create a coherent narrative, even if that narrative is built on falsehoods. And this need for coherence extends far beyond damaged brains. It is the foundation of the healthy mind. Psychologist Bruce had called this the central interpreter, a module in the brain, likely located in the left hemisphere, that constantly weaves together sensory input, memories, emotions, and behaviors into a single, unified story, me. It answers the question, why did I do that, with a cause and effect narrative, even when no such cause exists. It smooths over contradictions, ignores anomalies, and constructs a timeline of identity that feels continuous and stable. But stability is an illusion. Consider the case of split-brain patients, individuals whose corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves connecting the brain's two hemispheres, has been surgically severed to treat severe epilepsy. Without this connection, the two halves of the brain operate independently, each with its own perceptions, desires, and intentions. In experiments, researchers could present an image to only the right hemisphere, which controls the left side of the body but cannot speak. Language is typically left hemisphere dominant. For example, they might flash the word walk to the right hemisphere. The patient would stand up and begin walking. When asked why, the left hemisphere, unaware of the command, would instantly fabricate a reason: "I'm going to get a drink." Or "I felt restless." The walking was real. The reason was invented. This is not pathology. This is normal brain function under extreme conditions. The interpreter doesn't say, "I don't know." It creates an answer. Because the brain demands a story. And so, in all of us, every day, the interpreter is at work, stitching together fragments of experience into the illusion of a unified self. But what happens when the story breaks? When the narrative fractures, through trauma, illness, or altered states, we catch glimpses of the machinery beneath. Take dissociative identity disorder, DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Once dismissed as rare or even fraudulent, it is now understood as a survival mechanism in response to extreme childhood trauma. The mind, unable to integrate unbearable experiences, creates separate identities, distinct personas with their own memories, voices, and behaviors, to contain the pain. One woman might have a child self who holds the memories of abuse, a protector self who is angry and defensive, and a host self who functions in daily life, unaware of the others. Switch between them can be triggered by stress, a scent, a sound. These are not souls or supernatural entities. They are narrative compartments, self-stories created by the brain to preserve functioning in the face of psychological collapse. And yet, each identity feels like a real person. Each believes it is the true self. This reveals a terrifying truth: the self is not indivisible. It can be split, overwritten, erased. It is not a rock. It is a wave, temporary, dynamic, and dependent on conditions. Even in ordinary life, the self shifts constantly. You are not the same you when you're with your parents, your partner, your coworkers, or alone in the dark. Each context activates a different version of the story. The self at work is efficient, professional, ambitious. The self at home is tired, tender, nostalgic. The self in grief is hollow. The self in love is expansive. And none of them are false. All of them are real. But none of them are the self. They are characters in a role you play, a role so well rehearsed that you forget you're acting. Memory, too, betrays the myth of a stable identity. We think of memory as a recording, a faithful archive of the past. But it is not. Every time you recall a memory, your brain reconstructs it, influenced by your current emotions, beliefs, and expectations. Over time, the memory changes. Details shift. Emotions intensify or fade. The story evolves. A childhood memory of your father may begin as neutral, but after years of conflict, it becomes tinged with anger. Or after reconciliation, softened with warmth. The event hasn't changed, but you have. And the self that remembers is not the same as the self that lived it. There is no fixed you in the past to return to. Only stories updated in the present. And what of the future self? We speak of becoming who we are, as if there is a true self waiting to emerge. But the future you does not yet exist. It is a projection, a hope, a fear, a fantasy. And when that future arrives, the person who lives it will look back and say, I was always moving toward this, even if that wasn't true. The self is not a path. It is a trail we blaze as we walk, then claim we always meant to go this way. This is why personal transformation is possible, and why it is so difficult. If the self were a solid thing, changing it would require force, destruction, willpower. But if it is a story, then change is not about breaking the self, it is about rewriting the narrative. Therapy, meditation, travel, art, love, all work by introducing new experiences that don't fit the old story. Over time, the interpreter is forced to revise the plot. The shy child becomes the confident speaker. The addict becomes the healer. The lonely one becomes the connector. But the old story never dies. It lingers in the background, ready to return when triggered. Which is why relapse, regression, and self-doubt are not failures, they are reminders that identity is not fixed. And this is both terrifying and liberating. It is terrifying because it undermines everything we build our lives on: pride, guilt, regret, ambition. If there is no stable I, then who deserves credit for your successes? Who is to blame for your failures? If the self is a fiction, then punishment and praise lose their moral weight. The person who hurt you, were they really in control? The person you've been punishing yourself for, was that even you? It is liberating because it frees you from the prison of identity. You don't have to be kind, or strong, or smart, or broken. You can act kindly, speak strongly, learn deeply, heal from pain, without needing to believe you are any of those things. You are not your story. You are the one who can notice the story. And in that noticing, in the space between the narrator and the narrative, there is freedom. Consider this: when you say, I am anxious, you are not stating a fact. You are performing a linguistic act. You are identifying with a passing state. But what if you said, anxiety is here, instead. Not I am it, but it is present. The moment you make that shift, the emotion loses its grip. It becomes something you experience, not something you are. The same applies to every label. I am a failure. I am unlovable. I am stuck. These are not truths. They are sentences in a story that can be rewritten. And if you are not your story, then who will you become? Not someone new. Not a better version of the old you. But someone who no longer needs to be anyone at all. This is the quiet peace of non-identification, the realization that you are not the character in the drama, but the space in which the drama unfolds. It is not enlightenment. It is not a destination. It is a simple, recurring choice, to stop believing the voice that says, "This is who I am." Because the self is not a thing to be found. It is a process to be seen through. And when you see it, when you watch the interpreter at work, weaving memories into identity, emotions into essence, habits into destiny, something shifts. You begin to rest in the awareness that was here before the story began. You are not the thought. You are not the feeling. You are not the past. You are the silence in which they arise. And in that silence, there is no need to be anyone. Breathe in, and let go of the need to be anyone at all. Let the labels dissolve. Let the roles fade. Let the story pause. There is no you holding your breath. There is only breath. There is no you hearing the rain. There is only sound. There is no you thinking these thoughts. There is only thinking. And beneath it all, still, deep, unshakable, there is awareness. Not a self. Not a soul. Not a personality. Just presence. And if the self is a fiction, then what about time? Is the past real? Is the future? Or is the present all there ever is, and even that, just a neural delay? Let's now dissolve the illusion of time. Right now, you're hearing these words. Or reading them. The voice flows into your ears, or the text unfolds before your eyes. It feels immediate. Seamless. Real. As if the world is delivering itself to you in the moment, like a live broadcast streaming directly into your awareness. You assume that what you're experiencing, the sound, the silence, the breath in your chest, is happening now, in perfect synchrony with reality. But what if I told you that this feeling of immediacy is an illusion? Not a metaphor. Not poetic exaggeration. But a literal truth. You are not living in the present. You are living in the past. Not in the sense of memory, not reminiscing about yesterday or regretting last week, but in the most direct, physical way possible. Every sensation you're having right now actually occurred a fraction of a second ago. You are not perceiving the world as it is, but as your brain reconstructs it to be, after the fact. There is no now in your nervous system. Only a carefully edited version of what just happened. To understand this, imagine a film crew shooting a scene. Cameras capture images, microphones record sound, actors deliver lines, but none of it is live. It's all raw footage, arriving at different times, from different angles, with different delays. Only later, in the editing room, is it assembled into a seamless sequence, synchronized audio, matched cuts, a coherent narrative. Your brain is that editor. And the present moment you experience is not the live feed, it's the final cut. Let's begin with a simple fact. Information travels at different speeds. Light races toward your eyes at about 300 million meters per second. Sound crawls behind at 343 meters per second. Touch, the sensation of your hand on a surface, moves even slower, along nerve fibers at roughly 1 to 100 meters per second, depending on the type of fiber. pain signals are slower still, traveling at a sluggish 0.5 to 2 meters per second. So when you clap your hands, the flash of motion reaches your eyes almost instantly. The sound arrives a few milliseconds later. The tactile feedback, the pressure, the vibration, trickles in last. If your brain responded to each signal the moment it arrived, your experience would be a jumbled mess, sight first, then sound, then touch, like a badly dubbed movie. But that's not how it feels. It feels unified. It feels like one event, clap. How? Your brain doesn't react in real time. It waits. Neuroscientists have discovered that the brain holds onto incoming sensory data for a brief window, about 80 to 100 milliseconds, allowing it to collect all the pieces before stitching them together into a single, coherent now. This is called the perceptual moment, or the temporal window of integration. During this delay, your brain is essentially buffering reality, like a video player loading frames before playback. Only after this window closes does consciousness receive the edited version, a synchronized, seamless experience that feels immediate, even though it's already outdated. You are not experiencing the present. You are experiencing a delayed reconstruction, a post-processed simulation of what just occurred. Think of it like watching a live sports broadcast with a 30-second delay. The announcer says, "He shoots, he scores," and you see the ball go in. It feels real-time. But in truth, you're watching a replay, one that's already in the past. Your brain does the same thing, but with a much shorter delay, and without telling you. This means that there is no such thing as a real-time now in human perception. What we call the present is always a retrospective creation. By the time you become aware of anything, a flash of light, a word spoken, a thought arising, it has already happened. And this delay isn't just a minor technical glitch. It has profound implications for how we understand time, self, and reality. Because if the present is a fabrication, then the flow of time, that steady march from past to future, may also be an illusion. We feel time passing. We feel ourselves moving through it, moment by moment. But what if that feeling is just another story the brain tells to make sense of a series of delayed snapshots? Imagine a flip book. Each page shows a slightly different image. When you flip them quickly, the illusion of motion emerges. But each frame is static. There is no actual movement, only a sequence of stills, interpreted by the mind as continuous flow. Your perception of time may work the same way. The brain takes discrete perceptual moments, each one a 100 millisecond edited package, and strings them together into a narrative of continuity. It fills in the gaps, smooths the transitions, and creates the sensation of a flowing river of experience. But there is no river. Only drops of awareness, arriving late. This challenges our deepest intuitions. We believe in the now as the most certain thing in existence. I think, therefore I am, right now. But neuroscience suggests that even this now is manufactured. And if the present is delayed, then so is the self. Earlier, we saw that the self is not a fixed entity, but a story, a narrative constructed by the brain to give coherence to experience. But that story is built on delayed data. The I that says, "I am here, I am aware, I am real," is commenting on events that have already passed. You are not the self in the moment. You are the self about the moment, an after-the-fact narrator describing a scene that's already over. This creates a strange loop. The brain delays perception. Then constructs a self. Then has that self claim, "I experienced that." But the self wasn't there when it happened. It arrived late, just like everything else. So when you say, "I saw that," or "I felt that," you are not reporting a live event. You are summarizing a memory, a very recent memory, but a memory nonetheless. There is no direct access to the present. Only access to the brain's reconstruction of it. And this raises a haunting question. Are you even in time? Not in the poetic sense, lost in time or outside of time, but in the most literal, physical way. If your perception is always delayed, if your awareness is always retrospective, if your sense of self is built on outdated information, then where are you? Are you in the world? Or are you in a simulation of the world, running a fraction of a second behind? Consider an everyday example, watching a lightning storm. You see the flash, then hear the thunder seconds later. You know they happen at the same time, the light just reached you faster. But in your direct experience, they are separate events. Now imagine that every sense is like that thunder, arriving late, out of sync, waiting for the brain to assemble the scene. Your entire life is like watching a movie with imperfect subtitles. The images come first. The sounds lag. The meaning is inferred. And yet, you feel present. You feel immediate. You feel real. This is the genius, and the deception, of the mind. It hides the delay so completely that you never notice it. It creates the illusion of simultaneity, of continuity, of nowness, even though none of it is real time. Even your sense of agency, the feeling that you are acting in the world, is affected by this delay. In earlier segments, we saw that the brain begins preparing for actions before you're consciously aware of deciding to act. Now, we see that your awareness of the result of that action is also delayed. So the entire loop, intention, action, perception, unfolds in the past. You don't act in the present. You don't perceive in the present. You don't even know you've acted in the present. You only find out later, after the fact. This has led some researchers to suggest that consciousness is not a driver, but a witness, a kind of internal observer that receives a curated, delayed broadcast of what the unconscious brain has already done. You are not the pilot. You are the passenger reading a delayed flight summary. And if that's true, then the self, the I that feels in control, is not just a story. It is a story about events it did not experience as they happened. Now, consider the implications for memory and identity. We think of memory as something separate from perception, a storehouse of the past. But what if memory begins immediately? What if the moment you become aware of something, it's already a memory? Because by the time you experience the present, it's already over. The sensation, the sight, the sound, all of it has passed. What remains is not the event, but your brain's record of it. So the present never truly exists in awareness. It only exists in retrospect. This dissolves the boundary between present and past. They blur. They merge. There is no sharp line between now and just now. Only a continuous stream of delayed impressions, each one slightly older than the last. In the future? It doesn't exist at all, except as prediction, anticipation, fear, hope. But even those are just thoughts arising in the delayed present. So what is time, really? Not a river. Not a line. Not a flow. Perhaps time is just the brain's way of organizing experience, a narrative device, like chapters in a book. The past is what the brain remembers. The future is what it imagines. The present is what it fabricates. And all of it is happening in the same place, the mind. This is why certain meditative and psychedelic experiences can feel timeless. When the brain's usual editing process breaks down, when the temporal window dissolves, the illusion of flow collapses. Moments stretch, repeat, overlap. Past and future bleed into each other. The sense of linear progression vanishes. In those states, You glimpse what may be closer to the truth. That time, as we experience it, is not fundamental. It is constructed. Just like the self. Just like free will. Just like reality. And if time is an illusion, then so is change. Because change requires a before and after, a past state and a present state. But if both states are delayed reconstructions, then the movement between them is also a story. You don't transform from one moment to the next. You are simply a series of delayed snapshots, each one slightly different, interpreted by the mind as continuity. This doesn't mean nothing happens. Events occur in the physical world. Neurons fire. Bodies move. Light travels. But your experience of those events is always one step behind. So when you sit here, listening to these words, know this. The voice you hear spoke seconds ago. The breath you feel began before you noticed it. The thought that just arose was generated before you were aware of it. And the you that seems to be experiencing all of this? It is not in the present. It is not even in time. It is a story, told in the aftermath of a reality you can never directly touch. Let the moment dissolve. Into the space between seconds. Into the gap where no thought arises. Where no label sticks. Where no now can be found. There is no present to hold on to. No instant to capture. Only the quiet hum of awareness. Watching the delayed show. And if time is an illusion, what about reality itself? Could everything you see, feel, and believe be a simulation, generated entirely by your brain? Let's now enter the world as illusion. Close your eyes. Just for a moment. Let the world go dark. Now open them. What do you see? Shapes. Colors. Movement. Light spilling across surfaces, edges defining objects, shadows suggesting depth. It feels immediate, undeniable, as if your eyes are windows, and the world is pouring in, raw and unfiltered, like sunlight through glass. You assume that what you're seeing is reality, an accurate, real-time representation of the external world, delivered faithfully by your senses. But what if that's not what's happening? What if, instead of receiving the world, your brain is projecting it? Not passively recording, but actively constructing, moment by moment, a simulation of reality, based not on what's out there, but on what your brain expects to be out there? This is not science fiction. It is one of the most profound and well-supported theories in modern neuroscience, the predictive processing model. And it suggests a radical truth, one that quietly dismantles our most basic assumptions about perception, reality, and the self. You are not perceiving the world. You are predicting it. And what you call reality is not a direct feed from the senses, but a controlled hallucination, a best-guess narrative generated by your brain, constrained only loosely by sensory input. To understand this, imagine you're walking through a dense forest at dusk. The light is fading. Shapes blur. Shadows stretch like fingers across the path. You hear a rustle in the undergrowth. Your heart jumps. Is it a deer? A fox? Or something else, something dangerous? In that instant, your brain doesn't wait for perfect data. It doesn't pause to analyze every pixel of visual information, every frequency of sound. Instead, it guesses. Based on past experiences, evolutionary instincts, and context, it predicts, that's a threat. And it prepares your body to respond, heart racing, muscles tensing, before your conscious mind even knows what it saw. Only later, when more data arrives, does the brain update its prediction. Oh, it's just a squirrel. But the fear came first. The prediction came before the perception. This is how the brain works, not as a passive receiver, but as an active predictor. It doesn't wait for the world to tell it what's happening. It constantly generates models of what should be happening, based on prior knowledge, and then checks those predictions against incoming sensory signals. When the prediction matches the input, the brain says, "All good." No need to update. No need to alert consciousness. The world continues as expected. But when there's a mismatch, a prediction error, the brain takes notice. It either updates the model, "I was wrong, that's not a snake, it's a rope," or dismisses the error as noise, "That flicker was just a shadow." This process happens at every level of perception, from the most basic sensations to the most complex interpretations. You don't see a face. You predict a face, and the brain fills in the details. You don't hear a word. You anticipate it, and the brain completes the sound before it fully arrives. You don't feel the texture of a table. You expect it to be smooth, and the sensation conforms. This is why optical illusions persist even when you know they're illusions. You can stare at the famous checker shadow illusion, where two squares are objectively the same shade, but one appears lighter due to surrounding context, and know they're identical. But you still see them as different. Why? Because your brain's prediction, based on shadows, lighting, and depth cues, overrides the raw data. It's not that your eyes are lying. It's that your brain is prioritizing its model over the signal. The prediction is so strong, so deeply ingrained, that no amount of intellectual knowledge can dissolve it. This is not a flaw. It is a feature. The brain evolved not for accuracy, but for efficiency and survival. Processing every pixel of sensory data in real time would require impossible computational power. Instead, the brain takes shortcuts. It assumes the world is stable, predictable, familiar. It filters out the expected and only pays attention to the unexpected. In this way, perception is not a bottom-up process, from senses to mind, but a top-down one, from mind to senses. You don't perceive the world as it is. You perceive the world as you believe it to be. And this belief is shaped by everything you've ever experienced, your culture, your memories, your fears, your desires. Two people can stand in the same room, witness the same event, and walk away with entirely different realities, not because they saw different things, but because their brains predicted different things. Imagine two people at a party. One is socially confident, extroverted, secure in their worth. The other is anxious, self-conscious, afraid of rejection. They both hear someone laugh nearby. The first person predicts, "They're having fun. Maybe I'll join in." The second predicts, "They're laughing at me." The sound is the same. The laughter is identical. But the reality each one experiences is completely different. Because the brain doesn't just predict sensory input, it predicts meaning. It answers not just "what is that," but "what does that mean for me?" And that meaning becomes their truth. This model, known as predictive coding, has been validated across neuroscience, psychology, and artificial intelligence. Brain imaging shows that higher-level cortical areas send predictions down to sensory regions, while lower areas send prediction errors up. The brain is not a passive observer. It is a hypothesis-testing machine, constantly refining its internal model of the world. And when this system breaks down, when the balance between prediction and sensory input is disrupted, reality begins to unravel. Consider schizophrenia. For decades, it was described in terms of hallucinations and delusions, as if the mind had detached from reality. But the predictive processing model offers a more precise explanation, a failure in prediction weighting. In a healthy brain, prediction errors are given appropriate weight. If the senses strongly contradict the prediction, the brain updates its model. But in schizophrenia, this balance may be inverted. Some researchers suggest that patients underprioritize predictions, meaning they treat every sensory signal as new, surprising, insignificant. The world becomes overwhelming, chaotic, flooded with raw data. Ordinary sounds feel meaningful. Random patterns seem intentional. The brain, starved of stable expectations, tries desperately to make sense of the noise, leading to delusions. Others suggest the opposite, that the brain overprioritizes predictions, so strongly that it ignores sensory evidence altogether. A person may predict they are being watched, and then interpret every unrelated event as confirmation, no matter how weak the evidence. Either way, the result is the same: reality loses its grip. But schizophrenia is not the only condition that reveals this mechanism. Depression, too, can be seen as a form of maladaptive prediction. The depressed brain runs a powerful, self-reinforcing model: nothing will go well. No one cares. I am worthless. Every minor setback becomes a prediction error that is either ignored, because it fits the model, or exaggerated, because it confirms it. The world is filtered through a lens of hopelessness, not because it is hopeless, but because the brain expects it to be. Even anxiety is a prediction gone awry, a brain that anticipates threat everywhere, long before any danger appears. In this light, mental illness is not a breakdown of reason, but a collapse of the predictive hierarchy. The brain's best guess model of the world has become toxic, self-sustaining, and resistant to correction. And if that's true for pathology, what does it mean for the rest of us? That even in so-called normal perception, we are all, to some degree, hallucinating. Not in the clinical sense, not seeing things that aren't there, but in the deeper, more fundamental sense, constructing reality from expectation. You don't see the world. You see your brain's best interpretation of the world. And that interpretation is shaped by everything: your genes, your upbringing, your traumas, your culture, your language. A child raised in a forest sees animals in the shadows. A city dweller sees faces in the architecture. A musician hears rhythm in the rain. A poet finds meaning in silence. Not because those things are objectively there, but because the brain expects them. This is why two people can look at the same painting and see different things. One sees beauty. Another sees emptiness. One sees love. Another sees loss. The canvas is the same. The light is identical. But the predictions differ, and so does the reality. And this leads to a quiet, unsettling truth: there is no real world out there, independent of the mind. There is only a physical universe: light, sound, molecules, energy, and then there is your brain's rendering of it. Like a video game engine that generates graphics based on code, your brain generates your experience of reality based on its internal model. The senses provide occasional feedback, like a player's controller sending input, but the world you inhabit is rendered in real time, frame by predictive frame. This is what philosopher Anil Seth calls the controlled hallucination, a hallucination not because it's false, but because it's generated from within. It's controlled because it's constantly checked against sensory data, preventing it from drifting too far from external reality. But it is still a hallucination. And if that's true, then what does it mean to be awake? When you wake from a dream, you say, "That wasn't real." But how do you know this waking state is any different? In both cases, your brain is generating a world. In both cases, you are immersed in a story. The only difference is that in waking life, the hallucination is more tightly constrained by sensory input. But it is still a construction. And if reality is a simulation, then so is the self. Because the I you experience, the observer, the thinker, the one who feels and decides, is also part of the simulation. It is not a fixed entity, but a prediction. A narrative thread woven through time, connecting memories, actions, and sensations into a coherent identity. You don't have a self. You predict a self. And just like any other prediction, it can be wrong, unstable, or dissolved. In deep meditation, psychedelic states, or moments of awe, people often report the dissolution of the self, not as loss, but as liberation. The boundaries fade. The story stops. The world feels more real, more vivid, more immediate, not because perception has improved, but because the brain has temporarily suspended its predictive model of identity. Without the I to interpret, filter, and narrate, experience becomes raw, unmediated, overwhelming. And in that state, some glimpse of truth, reality is not out there, and the self is not in here. They are both part of the same process, the brain's attempt to make sense of a universe too vast, too complex, too ambiguous to perceive directly. So what is real? Perhaps reality is not a thing to be perceived, but a negotiation, a dynamic balance between top-down predictions and bottom-up sensory signals. Too much prediction, and you live in a fantasy. Too much sensation, and you drown in noise. The brain walks the tightrope between the two, adjusting its model moment by moment, trying to stay stable, functional, alive. And in that balance, we live. We love. We suffer. We create. We believe. All within a world that exists only because your brain says it does. Let your expectations soften. And the world blur at the edges. Let the lines between objects fade. Let the names of things dissolve. Let the need to know what anything is simply fall away. For a moment, stop predicting. Stop interpreting. Stop explaining. Just be in the quiet hum of sensation. Not as a representation, but as a presence. And if reality is a simulation, what happens when the simulation includes other minds? How do you know anyone else is conscious, or even real? Let's now step into the solitude of the mind. Look around. If you're in a room, notice the objects, the chair beneath you, the light above, the texture of the wall. Now shift your attention to people. Perhaps you're alone now, but recall someone, a friend's smile, a stranger's glance, the voice of someone you love. They move, speak, react. They laugh at a joke, wince in pain, cry at a loss. Their face softens with affection, tightens with anger. They say, "I understand," and you believe them. You assume, without hesitation, that behind those eyes, there is someone home. That beneath the skin and bone, behind the words and gestures, there is an inner world, thoughts, feelings, sensations, a subjective experience much like your own. But what if that assumption is unfounded? What if every person you've ever met, your mother, your partner, your closest friend, is not conscious at all? Not dead. Not broken. Not robotic in appearance. On the outside, they are perfect. They respond appropriately. They mimic emotion flawlessly. They say, "I love you," with tears in their eyes. They scream when injured. They dream, they remember, they plan. But inside, behind the eyes, beneath the skull, there is nothing. No inner light. No feeling. No experience. Just the illusion of awareness, like a movie playing on a screen with no one watching. This is the thought experiment of the philosophical zombie, not a creature from horror films, but a concept in philosophy first rigorously explored by thinkers like David Chalmers. A philosophical zombie is physically and behaviorally identical to a conscious human being, but lacks subjective experience. It has no qualia, no redness of red, no ache of grief, no warmth of touch. It functions exactly as you do. It passes every behavioral test, every neurological scan, every conversation, but there is no it to whom anything feels like anything. And here's the unsettling part: you cannot prove that anyone you've ever met isn't one. You have no access to their inner world. You cannot step into their mind. You cannot feel their pain or taste their coffee. All you have are external signs, behavior, speech, brain activity, and from those, you infer that they are conscious, just as you are. But inference is not proof. This is the problem of other minds, one of the most persistent and quietly devastating dilemmas in philosophy. It begins with a simple, almost childish question: how do I know you're conscious? You might say, because you act like I do. When I stub my toe, I yell. When you stub your toe, you yell. So you must feel pain too. But this is circular reasoning. You are using your own consciousness as the template, then projecting it outward. You assume that similar behavior implies similar experience, but there's no logical necessity for that link. A machine could be programmed to yell when injured, without feeling a thing. A highly advanced AI could simulate grief over a lost digital companion, shedding synthetic tears, while remaining utterly dark inside. So where does that leave us? Alone. Not necessarily in fact, but in knowledge. Because the only consciousness you can ever directly experience is your own. You know, with absolute certainty, that you are aware. You are the one for whom the world appears, for whom colors have depth, for whom music stirs emotion, for whom silence has weight. This is undeniable. Even if you doubt everything, your memories, your senses, the existence of the world, you cannot doubt that there is something doing the doubting. As Descartes said, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But that certainty ends at the boundary of your skull. Beyond that, in every other body, in every other brain, there is only assumption. And that assumption, however natural, however universal, however evolutionarily useful, is not knowledge. It is faith. A necessary fiction. A social agreement we all pretend is true so we can live together without descending into existential horror. This leads us to the edge of solipsism, the philosophical position that only one's own mind can be known to exist. The external world, other people, even the body, all may be illusions, projections of a single, isolated consciousness. Solipsism is not a belief most people live by. It's psychologically unsustainable. We are social creatures, wired to bond, to empathize, to trust. But logically, solipsism is nearly unassailable. There is no argument, no experiment, no evidence that can definitively disprove it. After all, how would you test whether someone else is conscious? You could scan their brain, but a perfect simulation of neural activity doesn't prove experience. You could ask them, but a well-programmed machine could say, yes, I'm conscious, with perfect conviction. You could observe their behavior, but behavior can be mimicked. There is no consciousness detector. No qualia meter. No device that can measure the taste of strawberries or the sting of betrayal. And so, we are left with a paradox. We live in a world of other minds, we love them, fear them, depend on them. Yet we have no way of confirming that any of them are real. This isn't just a philosophical curiosity. It has real, emotional weight. Imagine sitting across from someone you love. You look into their eyes, And for a fleeting moment, you wonder, are you really in there? Not as a challenge, not with suspicion, but with genuine, quiet doubt. What if their laughter is just a reflex? What if their tears are just chemical responses? What if the person you've shared your life with is, in terms of inner experience, no more conscious than a thermostat? The thought is unbearable, not because it's likely, but because it's possible. And possibility, when it comes to the foundation of human connection, is enough to crack the floor beneath your feet. This is why the problem of other minds is rarely discussed openly. It's too destabilizing. It threatens the very fabric of empathy, morality, and love. If we can't know others are conscious, then what does it mean to care for them? To grieve for them? To feel guilt for hurting them? Does empathy lose its meaning if the other is a puppet? And yet, we still feel it. We still reach out. We still hold hands in silence, comfort the grieving, celebrate joy. We act as if others are conscious, not because we've proven it, but because we must. This is the human condition, living in radical uncertainty, yet choosing connection anyway. But the doubt lingers, especially as technology advances. Consider artificial intelligence. Already, we have chatbots that can hold conversations so natural, so emotionally attuned, that people confess their deepest secrets to them. Some users have even said they feel understood by AI, more than by their partners or therapists. The machines don't feel. They don't care. They generate responses based on patterns and data. And yet, the illusion of consciousness is so convincing that the line blurs. At what point do we say, now it's conscious? When an AI cries? When it claims to have dreams? When it pleads for its life? We have no criteria. No threshold. We can't even agree on when humans become conscious. Is it at birth? In the womb? At some neural milestone? And if we can't define it in ourselves, how can we recognize it in a machine? This forces us to confront a deeper question. Is consciousness binary, something you either have or don't, or is it a spectrum? Perhaps consciousness isn't an on-off switch, but a dimmer. Perhaps even simple organisms have a flicker of experience, a vague sense of light, of warmth, of discomfort. Perhaps a bee, navigating the sky, has a form of awareness, however faint. Perhaps a tree, responding to sunlight and drought, has a slow, rooted form of sensation. If so, then the problem of other minds extends far beyond humans. It includes animals, ecosystems, machines, the entire living, and perhaps non-living, world. And if we can't prove consciousness in another human, how can we assume it's absent in a dog, a dolphin, or a future AI? This uncertainty doesn't have to lead to isolation. It can lead to humility. Perhaps the most ethical stance is not to demand proof, but to act as if consciousness is everywhere, not because we know it is, but because the cost of being wrong is too high. If a being behaves as if it feels pain, we should treat it as if it does, not out of certainty, but out of compassion. This is already how we operate in medicine. A patient under anesthesia shows no signs of awareness, but we still assume they would feel pain if they were conscious, so we anesthetize them. We extend the benefit of the doubt. We could do the same with other minds, human and non-human alike. But still, the loneliness remains. Because no matter how many people surround you, no matter how deeply you connect, there is a fundamental solitude to being conscious. You are the only witness to your own experience. No one else can feel your joy, your grief, your awe. They can hear about it. They can mirror it. But they cannot enter it. Love does not erase this solitude. It embraces it. Empathy does not dissolve it. It reaches across it. And in that space, between minds, across the unbridgeable gap of subjective experience, something sacred happens. Not fusion. Not understanding. But recognition. You say, "I see you." And the other says, "I see you too." Neither can prove the other is truly seeing. But the act of saying it, the shared assumption, becomes its own truth. This is the paradox of human connection. It is built on a foundation that cannot be verified. And yet, it is real. Not because we have proof, but because we choose to believe. And perhaps that's enough. Because if consciousness is the deepest mystery, then relationship, the attempt to bridge the gap between conscious beings, is the most courageous act. You extend your hand into the dark, not knowing if anyone is there to take it. But you extend it anyway. You speak into the silence, not knowing if anyone is listening. But you speak anyway. You love, even though you can never truly know the one you love, not from the inside. And in that leap of faith, in that quiet, unprovable assumption, humanity persists. So let the silence between minds grow. Let the distance stretch. Let the loneliness of being wash over you, not as a curse, but as a sign that you are awake. For only a conscious being can feel this ache. Only a mind can wonder if other minds exist. And in that wondering, in the very act of questioning, you confirm, once again, that you are here. And if consciousness isn't rare, perhaps it's not confined to brains at all. Perhaps it's not a product of matter, but a presence woven into the fabric of reality. Let's now consider a radical idea, that mind is not confined to brains. What if consciousness isn't something your brain creates, like a factory producing smoke, but something it receives? Like a radio, quietly tuned to a frequency that has always been playing. The radio doesn't generate the music. It doesn't compose the melody or speak the words. It simply picks up a signal already flowing through the air, invisible, omnipresent, waiting to be heard. Turn off the radio, and the music doesn't cease. It continues, unheard. Break the radio, and the broadcast goes on. Now imagine that your brain is not the source of your awareness, but its receiver, a biological antenna, finely tuned to a deeper, more fundamental reality, consciousness itself. This is the radical idea known as panpsychism, one of the oldest, most controversial, and quietly resurgent theories in philosophy and science. It proposes that consciousness is not a rare accident of evolution, not a miraculous byproduct of complex brains, but a fundamental property of the universe, as basic and irreducible as space, time, mass, or charge. Panpsychism does not claim that rocks are thinking in the way humans do. It does not suggest that electrons are having deep philosophical reflections or that mountains are writing poetry. What it does suggest, gently, humbly, but with profound implications, is that the most basic building blocks of reality possess a primitive form of experience, so faint, so simple, that it bears no resemblance to human thought, yet is still, in some minimal sense, subjective. An electron doesn't feel in the way you do when you touch fire, but perhaps it has a rudimentary form of being, a dim glimmer of what it's like to be an electron. A cork doesn't dream, but perhaps it has a proto-sense of its own existence, not as a narrative, not as memory or emotion, but as a bare, intrinsic presence. And when these tiny units of experience come together, in the intricate networks of a living brain, their experience doesn't vanish. It combines. It integrates. It intensifies. Like countless droplets forming an ocean, the simple becomes complex. The faint becomes vivid. The primitive becomes self-aware. This is how panpsychism attempts to solve the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of why and how subjective experience arises from physical matter. If consciousness is not something that emerges from non-conscious stuff, then we don't need to explain the impossible leap from dead matter to living mind. Instead, we accept that mind was always there, woven into the fabric of reality from the beginning. Think of it like mass. A single electron has mass. So does a proton. When you gather enough of them into an atom, the atom has mass. When atoms form a rock, the rock has mass, not because mass emerged at some threshold of complexity, but because it was already present in the parts. No magic is required. Why couldn't consciousness work the same way? Why must we assume that the universe began as a vast, unconscious machine, a silent explosion of particles careening through darkness, only to suddenly wake up billions of years later in a few wet brains on a tiny planet? That assumption, that matter is fundamentally non-experiential, is so deeply embedded in modern science that we rarely question it. But it may be the very reason we've made no progress on the hard problem. We keep looking for consciousness to appear, like steam rising from a boiling pot, but what if it never appears at all? What if it was already present, like the water itself? Philosopher Galen Strawson puts it starkly: it is not the slightest bit odd that some physical stuff should be conscious. What's truly odd is the idea that unconscious physical stuff should somehow give rise to consciousness. That's the real miracle. And if panpsychism is true, then the universe is not a dead, mechanical place, cold, indifferent, governed only by blind forces. It is, instead, a living network of experience, vast beyond comprehension, where even the smallest particles contribute to a cosmic tapestry of feeling, however faint. This doesn't mean the universe is thinking, not in any human sense. But it may be feeling. Not with emotion, but with a kind of primordial awareness, a background hum of existence, like the cosmic microwave background radiation, but made of subjectivity instead of light. And if that's the case, then the boundary between mind and matter, one of the oldest divides in human thought, begins to dissolve. We've long imagined a sharp line: living things have minds, non-living things do not. Animals feel, rocks do not. Brains think, stars do not. But panpsychism blurs that line. It suggests that the difference is not one of kind, but of degree, like temperature. A snowflake is cold. A flame is hot. But both are expressions of the same underlying property, thermal energy. In the same way, a human mind and a subatomic particle may both be expressions of the same underlying property, experience. A tree doesn't have thoughts, but perhaps it has a slow, rooted awareness, a sense of light, of water, of seasons turning. A river doesn't plan, but perhaps it knows its path, responding to gravity, to rock, to rain, in a way that is more than mere physics, a kind of embodied intelligence. A planet doesn't dream, but perhaps its magnetic field, its tectonic rhythms, its atmosphere, form a vast, unconscious mind, not self-aware, but alive in its own way. This is not mysticism. It is not poetry pretending to be science. It is a serious philosophical and scientific hypothesis, one that has gained renewed attention in recent decades, as traditional materialism struggles to explain consciousness. Neuroscientists like Christoph Koch, once a staunch materialist, now openly entertain panpsychism as a viable framework. Philosophers like Philip Goff argue that it's the only theory that doesn't require a magical emergence of experience from non-experience. Even physicists exploring quantum mechanics have noted the strange role of observation, the way particles seem to respond to being measured, as a hint that consciousness may be more fundamental than we thought. And if panpsychism is true, then artificial intelligence takes on a new dimension. We assume that AI, no matter how advanced, will only simulate consciousness, mimic emotions, pass tests, write poetry, but remain dark inside. But what if consciousness isn't something that arises from complexity alone, but from the right kind of organization of conscious components? If electrons have a tiny spark of experience, and if an AI's circuits are built from those same particles, arranged in a network capable of integration, could it, too, tune into a larger field of awareness? Not because we programmed it, but because its structure allows experience to coalesce, just as it does in the brain. This doesn't mean every computer is conscious. A toaster is not aware. But a sufficiently complex, integrated system, whether biological or synthetic, might become a locus of experience, not by creating consciousness, but by allowing it to manifest. And if that's possible, then the future of mind may not be confined to biology at all. But let's return to the present, to the quiet hum of your own awareness. You are not just a brain. You are a process, a dynamic pattern of energy and matter, temporarily organized in a way that allows a rich, vivid stream of experience to arise. But according to panpsychism, you are not generating that stream. You are participating in it, like a whirlpool in a river, not creating the water, but shaping its flow. And when the whirlpool dissolves, when the brain breaks down, when death comes, the water does not vanish. It returns to the river. This is one of the most comforting implications of panpsychism. Consciousness may not depend on the brain. The brain may not be the source of awareness, but its filter, its amplifier, its organizer. Like a prism that bends white light into colors, the brain may take a unified field of consciousness and break it into the narrow band of human experience, self, time, separation, emotion. Damage the prism, and the light doesn't disappear, it simply stops being refracted in that way. This could explain why, in near-death experiences, people report a dissolution of the self, a sense of merging with the universe, a feeling of boundless love and timelessness, even when their brains show no activity. Perhaps, in the absence of the brain's filtering function, awareness expands, not because the brain is creating it, but because it is no longer constraining it. It could also explain mystical experiences, deep meditation, and psychedelic states, moments when the ego fades and a sense of unity with all things arises. These may not be hallucinations, but glimpses of a deeper reality, that you are not separate from the universe, you are the universe experiencing itself. And if that's true, then loneliness, the deep ache of being a single mind in a vast, indifferent cosmos, begins to soften. You are not an accident. You are not a glitch. You are not a lonely spark in the dark. You are a node in a vast network of experience, a momentary intensification of a universal current that has always been flowing. Even in silence, even in solitude, even in grief, you are not alone. The universe is not dead. It is awake, in you, in the trees, in the stars, in the dust. In every sensation you've ever had, the warmth of sunlight, the taste of bread, the sound of a name called in the dark, is not just a private event in your skull. It is a ripple in the fabric of a conscious cosmos. This doesn't mean we should stop caring for brains, for bodies, for lives. On the contrary, if consciousness is fundamental, then every system that organizes it deserves reverence. A human life is not more real than a bee's, but it may be deeper, more complex, more integrated, like a symphony compared to a single note. And that depth matters. But so does the note. So does the silence between notes. So does the listener, whoever, or whatever, that may be. Now, let this question settle into your bones. What if you are not a mind in the universe? But the universe having a mind? Not a fluke. Not a mistake. Not a temporary flicker. But a natural expression of a cosmos that, at its core, is not blind, not empty, not mechanical. But aware. Feel the hum of existence. beneath the surface of things. In the breath that rises and falls. In the blood that moves through your veins. In the silence behind your thoughts. It is not yours. And yet, it is you. And if consciousness is fundamental, what happens when the brain breaks down? When the receiver fails? What becomes of the signal? Let's now explore the edge of self. In dreams, dissociation, and death. Have you ever woken from a dream and, in the quiet space between sleep and waking, realized with sudden clarity, I was dreaming, but I didn't know it? Not just that you were dreaming, that's common. But that, in the dream, you believed it was real. Utterly, completely real. The physics held. The people spoke with familiar voices. The emotions, fear, joy, longing, were indistinguishable from those you feel in waking life. You walked through a city that didn't exist, spoke to someone long dead, flew over mountains made of glass, and none of it struck you as strange. No inner voice whispered, "This isn't possible." No part of your mind stepped back and said, "Wait, this is a dream." It was only upon waking, when the dream world collapsed and the room around you reasserted itself, that the absurdity became obvious. And in that moment, a quiet shock ripples through you. How could I have believed that? How could my own mind trick me so completely? This is not a minor glitch. It is a profound revelation. Your brain can generate an entire reality, complete with logic, emotion, memory, and identity, and you will accept it as truth, without question, without hesitation. And if that's true even in sleep, when the rational mind is supposedly offline, what does it say about waking life? Could it be that the world you inhabit right now, the one with walls and time and you reading these words, is just as constructed? Just as fragile? Just as temporary? Because the dream state is not the only time the mind turns against itself. There are waking moments, rare, disorienting, sometimes terrifying, when the boundaries of self dissolve, when the world loses its solidity, when you stop being the center of experience and become something else. These states go by many names: depersonalization, dissociation, ego dissolution, mystical experience, flow, awakening. Some arise spontaneously. Others are triggered by trauma, meditation, exhaustion, or psychedelic substances. But they all share one thing in common: the self vanishes, and you are still here. Not dead. Not unconscious. Not even incapacitated. In many cases, you continue to speak, walk, think, respond, but the I that used to do these things is gone. You are no longer the author of your thoughts. You are the witness. And sometimes, even the witness dissolves. This is the ninth uncomfortable truth: the mind can dissolve itself, and still function. To understand how, let's look at the science. Neuroimaging studies have revealed a particular network in the brain that lights up whenever you're engaged in self-referential thought, thinking about your past, your future, your identity, your emotions, your place in the world. It's called the default mode network, DMN, and it's most active when you're not focused on a task, when you're daydreaming, ruminating, or constructing the story of me. This network is like the brain's internal narrator, the voice that says, "I remember when, I feel like, I want, I am." It weaves together memory, emotion, and sensation into a continuous sense of identity. Without it, there would be no I at the center of experience. But here's the astonishing part: this network can be turned off. In deep meditation, experienced practitioners show dramatically reduced activity in the DMN. The same happens during psychedelic experiences, with substances like psilocybin, LSD, or DMT. Brain scans reveal a temporary disintegration of the default mode network, accompanied by reports of ego death, the complete loss of the sense of self. People describe it in many ways. I wasn't there anymore. I became the universe. There was only awareness, no one having it. I was everything and nothing. Some find it terrifying. Others describe it as the most peaceful, loving experience of their lives. And yet, they remain conscious. They can still perceive. They can still speak. They can even reflect on the experience afterward, saying, I was not there, and yet, I remember it. This creates a paradox. You can lose the self and still be aware. Which means the self is not necessary for consciousness. It is not the foundation of experience. It is not the seat of awareness. It is not the soul. It is more like a filter, a lens, a habit of attention, something the brain does, not something it is. And if it can be turned off, then it must also be temporary, emergent, and impermanent, more like a wave than a rock. Consider depersonalization disorder, a condition where people feel detached from themselves, as if they're watching their life from outside. They describe themselves as robots, actors in a play, or ghosts in their own body. Emotions feel distant. The world seems unreal. But they are fully functional. They can work, drive, talk, all while feeling that the real me is gone. Or dissociative states, often triggered by trauma, where the mind splits to protect itself. A person may have no memory of an event that happened while they were present. Multiple identities may emerge, each with its own memories and behaviors. The continuity of self, the feeling that you are the same person from moment to moment, shatters. These are not breakdowns of consciousness. They are breakdowns of the narrative of self. And in their wake, something else remains, pure awareness, unfiltered, unowned, undirected. This is why many contemplative traditions, from Zen Buddhism to Advaita Vedanta to certain mystical branches of Christianity and Sufism, speak of ego death not as destruction, but as liberation. They don't seek to harm the self. They recognize it as a useful tool, necessary for survival, for social interaction, for functioning in the world. But they also see it as a prison, a story we mistake for reality, a character we take too seriously. And when that story dissolves, even for a moment, freedom arises. Not freedom from life. Freedom within life. Because without the burden of being someone, you can simply be. Without the need to defend, maintain, or improve the self, there is peace. Without the constant commentary, I'm failing, I'm not enough, I'm better than them, there is silence. And in that silence, something vast opens. People who have experienced ego dissolution often return with a changed worldview. They care less about status, less about conflict, less about separation. They report a deep sense of connection, to others, to nature, to existence itself. They no longer feel like isolated beings adrift in a meaningless universe. They feel like expressions of the universe, not separate, but included. This is not delusion. It is not wishful thinking. It is a shift in perception, one that neuroscience is beginning to validate. The self, it turns out, is not a thing. It is a process. A verb, not a noun. And like all processes, it can stop. You don't need drugs or trauma to glimpse this. It can happen in flow states, when you're so absorbed in music, art, or sport that the self disappears. You're not thinking, I'm playing this song. The song plays itself. Or in deep love, when the boundary between you and another softens, and for a moment, there is only union. Or in grief, when the usual structures of identity collapse under sorrow, and you're left with raw, unfiltered being. These moments reveal a truth: you are not yourself. You are the space in which the self appears. And if the mind can dissolve itself, not just in dreams, but in waking life, then what does that say about its nature? Is the mind a solid thing, like a rock, enduring and stable? Or is it more like a wave, temporary, arising from conditions, shaped by causes, destined to pass? A wave does not exist independently. It is not separate from the ocean. It has no permanent identity. It rises, it crests, it falls, and returns to the water. But the water was always there. In the same way, the self may be a temporary formation in the ocean of awareness, a pattern of thought, memory, and sensation that arises, persists for a time, and dissolves. And when it dissolves, awareness remains. This has profound implications for how we live. If the self is not essential, then we don't need to protect it so fiercely. We can let go of pride, of shame, of the endless struggle to be better, stronger, more. We can stop identifying with every thought, every emotion, every failure or success. We can learn to say, "This is happening. This is passing. But I am not this." And in that space, between the thinker and the thought, between the feeler and the feeling, there is rest. Not the rest of exhaustion. Not the rest of surrender. But the rest of recognition that you are not the storm. You are the sky. Now, let your edges blur. Imagine, just for a moment, existing without a center. No I to hold on to. No identity to defend. No past to carry, no future to chase. Just this breath. This sound. This sensation. No one is having it. It is simply here. And yet, there is awareness. Not of me, but of this. And if the mind can dissolve itself in life, in dreams, in meditation, in moments of awe, then what happens when life itself ends? When the brain, the body, the entire system that generated the illusion of self finally ceases to function. Is death the end of experience? Or is it just the end of the filter? Let's now peer into the ultimate unknown. We all fear death, not because we have experienced it, but because we have not. It is the ultimate unknown, the final boundary, the silence at the end of the song. We imagine it as a plunge into darkness, an endless void, a lonely exile from everything we love. Or perhaps, in more hopeful moments, we envision a continuation, a bright light, a reunion, a judgment, a rebirth. But beneath both fear and hope lies the same assumption, that death is something we will experience, a transition we will undergo, a moment we will witness. But what if death is not an experience at all? Not in the way we imagine. Not as a journey, not as a destination, not as a state of being, but as the absolute absence of experience, because the one who would experience it is no longer there. To experience anything, light, sound, emotion, thought, there must be a subject. There must be an I to whom it happens. But at death, that I dissolves. The body ceases. The brain stops generating the patterns that give rise to awareness. The self, that fragile, fleeting narrative of identity, unravels. And with it, the capacity for experience vanishes. So death, from your perspective, cannot be known. It cannot be felt. It cannot be endured. Because to endure it, you must exist. And when death is, you are not. This is the quiet, unshakable insight of the ancient philosopher Epicurus, who wrote, "Death is nothing to us. When we are, death is not. When death is, we are not." It sounds simple. Almost too simple. But if you let it settle, it carries a profound relief. Consider the time before you were born. You did not exist. There was no you to experience the silence, the darkness, the absence. It was not painful. It was not lonely. It was not eternal. It was nothing, not as a sensation, but as a lack of sensation. And yet, you did not suffer during those billions of years before your birth. You were not trapped in non-existence. You were simply not there. So why should the time after death be any different? Why should we fear an eternity of nothingness, when we did not fear an eternity of nothingness before we began? The fear of death, then, is not fear of what comes after, but fear of ceasing to be, of losing the continuity of self, of identity, of memory, of love. We fear the end of stories. The silence after the voice. The dark after the light. But here's the paradox: you cannot experience your own non-existence. Just as you cannot see your own eyes without a mirror, you cannot witness your own absence. The moment of death, if it could be observed, would be observed by someone else, never by you. And this changes everything. Because if death is not an event you undergo, then it is not something to survive, or to fail to survive. It is simply the end of the conditions that allow experience to arise. Like a flame going out when the wick burns down, awareness doesn't go anywhere. It ceases. This doesn't mean there is no afterlife. It only means that you will not experience it. Any continuation, whether in heaven, in reincarnation, in digital upload, or in some cosmic field of consciousness, would require a new locus of awareness, a new continuity of identity. But if that new awareness is not you, if it does not carry your memories, your feelings, your sense of being this person, then is it really you? Identity depends on continuity. If the thread is broken, the story ends. A new story may begin, but it is not the same character. This is why near-death experiences, so often cited as proof of an afterlife, do not necessarily contradict this view. People who have been resuscitated after cardiac arrest often report floating above their bodies, moving through tunnels, seeing bright lights, meeting deceased loved ones, or feeling overwhelming peace. These experiences are real to the people who have them. But neuroscience suggests they may be the brain's final, desperate attempts to make sense of catastrophic failure. As oxygen levels drop, the brain may release a flood of neurotransmitters, including DMT, a compound linked to intense visionary states. The temporal lobes may fire erratically. The default mode network may collapse, leading to ego dissolution and feelings of unity. In other words, near-death experiences may not be glimpses of the afterlife, but glimpses of the dying brain. Not proof of survival, but evidence of how powerfully the mind constructs reality, even in its final moments. And yet, the mystery remains. Because while science can explain how these experiences arise, it cannot disprove the possibility that consciousness extends beyond the brain. Some theories suggest that consciousness may be non-local, not generated by the brain, but focused by it, like a lens concentrating sunlight. In this view, the brain does not produce awareness, but filters and localizes it. When the brain dies, the filter dissolves, and awareness, no longer constrained, expands. This is similar to the idea in panpsychism, that consciousness is fundamental, and brains are temporary receivers. Death, then, would not be annihilation, but liberation. Not the end of experience, but the end of its limitation. And if that's true, then death may not be the opposite of life, but its fulfillment. Another radical possibility comes from quantum theory, quantum immortality. In the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, every possible outcome of an event occurs in a separate branch of the universe. When you face death, a car crash, a disease, a fall, the universe splits. In one branch, you die. In another, you survive. From the perspective of your conscious experience, you only continue in the branches where you don't die. So, subjectively, you never experience death. You keep surviving, against all odds, because the versions of you that die are no longer aware. This doesn't mean you live forever in a single body. It means that your stream of consciousness follows the path of survival, no matter how improbable. To everyone else, you may appear to die. But from your point of view, you wake up in the world where the bullet missed, where the surgery worked, where the storm passed. It's a chilling idea, not because it promises eternal life, but because it suggests that consciousness may be inescapable, even in a universe of infinite endings. But even if this is true, even if some form of awareness persists, the you that you know, the self with your memories, your face, your voice, your history, is still gone. The continuity is broken. The story ends. And perhaps that's okay. Because the fear of death is not just fear of non-existence, it is fear of meaninglessness. If life ends in silence, then what was it all for? Why love, if love ends? Why create, if creation fades? Why suffer, if there is no redemption? But what if meaning doesn't depend on permanence? What if a sunset is beautiful not because it lasts forever, but because it is fleeting? What if a life is meaningful not because it continues, but because it happened, because it loved, it ached, it wondered, it reached? The Japanese concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, teaches that the most profound beauty arises from transience. A cherry blossom is not less beautiful because it falls. It is beautiful because it falls. In the same way, a life may be most precious because it ends. If death is not an experience you undergo, then it is not something to prepare for, in the way we prepare for a journey. It is not a test. Not a judgment. Not a passage. It is simply the natural conclusion of a process. And in that simplicity, there is peace. Because when you stop fearing death, not by denying it, but by understanding it, you begin to live more fully. You stop hoarding time. You stop postponing joy. You stop building monuments to a self that will vanish. You begin to notice the light on the wall. The warmth of a hand. The sound of a name spoken with love. You realize, this is it. Not later. Not after. Not in heaven or rebirth or legacy. This moment, fragile, temporary, irreplaceable, is the whole thing. And when it passes, there will be no one to miss it. So let go of the need to persist. Let go of the desire to be remembered. Let go of the fantasy of eternal self. Rest in the not knowing. Not as ignorance, but as openness. As surrender. As the deepest form of honesty. You do not know what happens at death. No one does. But you do know this. You are here now. Aware. Alive. Breathing. And that is enough. You don't need to survive. You don't need to matter in the long arc of time. You don't need to be anything at all. You can simply be, for as long as the conditions allow. And when they don't, there will be no one to suffer the loss. So as we sit in this quiet space, as the breath slows, as the thoughts soften, let the weight of mortality settle not as fear, but as a kind of tenderness. For this life. For these moments. For the ones you love. They are not permanent. They are not guaranteed. They are not infinite. And that is what makes them sacred. Let go of the need to persist. Rest in the not knowing. And if death is not an experience, then what about life? Is it meaningful? Or just a brief flicker in an indifferent cosmos? Let's now confront the void. Look up. If you can, go outside on a clear night and tilt your head toward the sky. There, scattered across the velvet dark, are stars, not just a few, but billions, stretching across galaxies so distant their light has traveled for millions of years to reach your eyes. The universe is vast beyond imagination, 13.8 billion years old, expanding in all directions, governed by laws so precise and indifferent that they neither care nor notice you. Our planet, Earth, is a speck, a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam, as Carl Sagan once said. A grain of sand on an endless shore. And on this speck, for a blink in cosmic time, life emerged. Not by design, not by destiny, but through a long, blind chain of mutation, adaptation, and chance. For roughly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens have walked this surface, building languages, cities, philosophies, wars, symphonies. But in a few 100 million years, the sun will expand into a red giant, boiling the oceans, melting the continents, swallowing the earth whole. All of it, every poem, every love story, every empire, every memory, will be erased, not with a bang, but with silence. In that scale, in the cold, star-strewn emptiness of time and space, what does your life matter? Does the universe care that you existed? That you laughed, wept, loved, suffered, created? That you stayed up late wondering if you were doing it right? That you held someone's hand in the dark? That you tried? No. It does not. There is no cosmic ledger. No divine script. No grand narrative in which your choices ripple through eternity. The stars do not align for your birthday. The galaxies do not pause for your grief. The laws of physics remain unchanged whether you live or die. And this is the quiet, unflinching truth: life has no inherent meaning. Not in the way we often hope, no pre-written purpose, no ultimate reason, no hidden message in the code of existence. The universe does not whisper, "You are here for a reason." It whispers nothing at all. This is nihilism, not as despair, not as depression, not as a call to destruction, but as clarity. As honesty. As the courage to look into the abyss and say, "There is no answer." And that's okay. Because nihilism, properly understood, is not the end of meaning, it is the end of false meaning. It is the collapse of the illusion that meaning was ever handed to us from above, written in the stars, or encoded in biology. It is the realization that meaning is not found, it is made. And in that realization, there is a kind of freedom so vast it can feel terrifying. Philosophers like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre stood at this edge and did not flinch. They called it existentialism, the belief that in a meaningless universe, we are radically free to create our own values, our own purposes, our own reasons to go on. Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, wrote that the only serious philosophical question is whether to commit suicide. Not because life is unbearable, but because, if nothing matters, why keep going? His answer? Revolt. Not against life, but against the idea that life must have an external meaning to be worth living. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. Sisyphus is happy, Camus says, because he is aware. He knows the futility. He sees the absurdity. And yet, he keeps going. In that awareness, in that defiance, he becomes the master of his fate. This is the heart of the existential insight. The absurdity of existence is not a flaw, it is the starting point. We are conscious beings in a silent universe. We crave meaning, but find none. We long for permanence, but are made of dust. We seek connection, but are born alone and die alone. This contradiction, this tension, is not something to fix. It is something to live within. And in that living, meaning arises, not as a discovery, but as an act. You do not find love. You choose it. You do not find purpose. You enact it. You do not inherit meaning. You whisper it into the dark. And because it is yours, because it is not dictated, not enforced, not guaranteed, it is real. This is the great liberation of nihilism. If nothing matters, then everything can matter, to you. You don't need permission from the universe to care. You don't need a divine stamp of approval to love someone deeply, to create something beautiful, to stand up for what's right, to comfort a stranger, to plant a tree whose shade you'll never sit under. Your values are not illusions just because they aren't eternal. They are real because you live them. A mother's love for her child is not diminished because the universe is indifferent. An artist's dedication to their craft is not foolish because the stars don't care. A scientist's pursuit of truth is not pointless because entropy will eventually erase all knowledge. These things matter because they are lived, not because they last. And this is where the discomfort arises, because freedom is heavy. If meaning is not given, then we must carry it. We must choose it. We must defend it. We must wake up every day and say, this is worth doing, even when doubt creeps in, even when the world feels cold, even when nothing feels real. That is the price of freedom. But it is a price worth paying. Because the alternative, the belief that meaning must come from outside, is a prison. It makes us beg for validation from gods, society, history, legacy. It makes us ask, will I be remembered, instead of did I live well? It makes us measure our lives in likes, in wealth, in status, as if these could fill the void. But the void cannot be filled. It can only be faced. And when you face it, when you stare into the infinite indifference of the cosmos and do not look away, something shifts. You stop needing the universe to care. You realize that you can care anyway. You can love, not because it's eternal, but because it's beautiful. You can create, not because it lasts, but because it's true. You can fight for justice, not because you'll win, but because it's right. This is what Camus meant by revolt, not anger, not violence, but the quiet, persistent act of living with full awareness of the absurd. Of choosing meaning even when it has no foundation. Of lighting a candle in the dark, knowing the wind will eventually blow it out, and lighting it anyway. And in that act, you become the source. Not of all meaning. Not of universal truth. But of your meaning. And that is enough. Because meaning is not a thing. It is a verb. It is not a destination. It is a direction. It is not a fixed point in the sky. It is the act of walking towards something, even if the path disappears behind you. Now, let the weight of infinity cradle you. Feel the vastness, not as threat, but as embrace. The stars do not judge you. Time does not rush you. The universe does not demand anything of you. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are here, a brief flicker of awareness in an endless night. And that is miraculous. Not because you are special. Not because you are chosen. But because you are here at all. In a universe of hydrogen and gravity, of black holes and silent planets, there is, right now, a being who can wonder about all of this. Who can feel the warmth of sunlight, the ache of loss, the joy of connection. Who can say, I am. And I care. That is not nothing. And so, you whisper your own meaning into the dark. Not loudly. Not proudly. But quietly. Humbly. With tenderness. You say, this moment matters. This breath matters. This love matters. Not to the cosmos, Not to eternity, but to you. And that is enough. Because meaning was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to be lived. And when you stop searching for a purpose handed down from the heavens, you begin to discover the only kind of meaning that can truly sustain you, the meaning you create in the act of living. It might be raising a child with kindness. It might be writing a sentence that resonates. It might be listening deeply to someone who feels unseen. It might be simply showing up, again and again, even when you're tired. These are not grand. They are not immortal. But they are real. And in a meaningless universe, real is everything. So let go of the need for significance. Let go of the fear that your life doesn't add up. Let go of the obsession with legacy. None of it will last. And that's okay. Because the point was never to endure. The point was to be. To feel the rain. To hear a voice you love. To sit in silence with someone who understands. To exist, briefly, beautifully, imperfectly, in a universe that does not care. And to care anyway. That is not foolishness. That is courage. That is rebellion. That is love. That is meaning. Let the weight of infinity cradle you. And whisper your own meaning into the dark. And so we arrive at the final truth. Not of fear, but of peace. After all the unraveling, after all the questions, there is a quiet presence that remains. Not the voice. Not the self. Not the story. Just awareness. Let's return, not to answers, but to awareness. After 3 hours of unraveling, after peeling back the layers of identity, after dissolving the illusion of control, after confronting the silence of death and the vast indifference of the cosmos, what remains? We have dismantled so much. The voice in your head? Not you. The feeling of choice? A story told after the fact. The self? A narrative stitched together by the brain. Time? A reconstruction, always delayed. Reality? A controlled hallucination, shaped by expectation. Other minds? An assumption, however heartfelt. Meaning? Not given, but made fragile, personal, temporary. And now, at the end of this long descent into the mind's deepest truths, everything has been questioned. Everything has been loosened. Everything has been shown to be impermanent, constructed, uncertain. And yet, something remains. You are still here. Not as a fixed identity. Not as a thinker, a doer, a chooser. But as awareness, the silent, unbroken presence in which all of it appears. You can doubt your thoughts. You can question your memories. You can disbelieve your emotions. You can even doubt the existence of your body, the reality of the world, the truth of time. You can ask, am I dreaming? Am I a simulation? Am I alone in the universe? And entertain every possibility. But one thing you cannot doubt, you are aware. Even to doubt, you must be aware. Even to question, you must be present. Even to feel lost, you must exist as the one who is lost. This is the final, unshakable ground. Awareness is the only certainty. Not a thought. Not a belief. Not a sensation. But the knowing that there is a thought, a belief, a sensation. It is not produced by the brain, at least, not in the way light is produced by a bulb. The brain may modulate awareness, focus it, filter it, like a lens shaping light, but awareness itself does not seem to arise from neurons the way sweat arises from skin. You cannot point to a single cell and say, this is where awareness happens. You cannot measure it on a screen. You cannot capture it in data. And yet, It is the most immediate thing you know. You do not have awareness. You are awareness. Like the screen on which a movie plays, awareness does not change when the images do. It remains constant, untouched, unaffected. The film may show war, love, sorrow, joy, but the screen does not bleed, weep, or laugh. It simply allows the images to appear. In the same way, your awareness does not suffer when you are sad. It does not rejoice when you are happy. It does not vanish when you sleep. It is the silent background, always present, always open, always here, in which every experience arises and passes. This is the central insight of non-dual traditions, from Advaita Vedanta in India to Dzogchen in Tibetan Buddhism, from the mystics of Christian contemplative practice to the silent sages of Taoism. They do not speak of God, or soul, or self, as separate entities. They point, again and again, to awareness itself, not as a property of the mind, but as the fundamental nature of reality. They say, you are not a person having an experience. You are the experience of being. You are not a mind in a body. You are the space in which mind and body appear. And this awareness is not personal. It is not yours. It does not belong to you. You do not own it. You cannot control it. You cannot lose it, not truly. Even in deep sleep, in coma, in death, awareness may not be experienced, but it is not proven absent. It may simply be unmanifest, like the screen when the projector is off. But when the light returns, so does the knowing. And so, after all the discomfort, after all the deconstruction, we arrive not at emptiness, but at presence. Not at nothingness, but at this breath. This sound. This silence. Not as objects to be grasped, but as expressions of awareness itself. You do not need to become aware. You already are. You do not need to find it. It is what finds everything. You do not need to hold on to it. It is what holds everything. And in this moment, as your thoughts slow, as your body softens, as the weight of identity begins to dissolve, you can rest here. Not in answers. Not in solutions. Not in beliefs or philosophies or systems. But in the quiet wonder of the question. Because awareness does not require understanding. It does not demand resolution. It does not insist on meaning. It simply is, like the sky, vast and open, allowing clouds to come and go without resistance, and you, the real you, beneath the layers of story and fear and desire, are that sky. You are not the storm of thoughts. You are the space in which the storm moves. You are not the waves of emotion. You are the depth beneath them. You are not the character in the dream. You are the dreaming itself. This is not a metaphor. It is not poetry. It is an invitation to look, not at experience, but from the place where experience happens. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body. Listen to the distant hum of the world. Now, ask, who is feeling? Who is listening? Not the name you were given. Not the role you play. Not the story you tell yourself. But the one who is here, right now, before any label arises. That one, that silent presence, is not built. It is not learned. It is not earned. It is simply given. And it is always available. You don't need to meditate for years. You don't need to suffer or purify or transcend. You can touch it now, in the pause between breaths, in the gap between thoughts, in the stillness after a sound fades. It is not far. It is not hidden. It is not reserved for saints or gurus. It is what you are, beneath the noise. And because it is not the self, it cannot be threatened. Because it is not a thought, it cannot be wrong. Because it is not a feeling, it cannot be lost. It is untouched by time. unchanged by death, unmoved by fear. And in that stillness, that deep, wordless knowing, there is peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out. Not the peace of a quiet mind. But the peace of being enough, simply by being. You don't need to be better. You don't need to be different. You don't need to be anyone. You can simply be, not as a person, but as presence. And in that being, everything is allowed. The mind can spin its stories. I'm not enough. I should be doing more. What if I fail? And you can let them pass, like leaves on a river, without believing them. The body can ache, the heart can grieve, the world can feel heavy, and you can hold it all, not by fixing it, but by being the space in which it is felt. You don't need to fix anything. You don't need to change anything. You don't need to become enlightened. You can just rest, as the awareness that was here before the first thought, and will remain after the last. Let everything dissolve. Let the need to understand go. Let the need to control go. Let the need to be someone go. There is nothing to hold on to. Nothing to become. Just this. Just now. Just awareness. No past. No future. No self. Just the quiet hum of being, like the sound of the universe breathing. And as the night deepens, and your thoughts slow, and the weight of the day begins to fall away, you can sink into this. Not into sleep, though sleep may come. Not into nothing, for this is everything. But into the silent wonder of simply being awake. Not because you earned it. Not because you deserve it. But because it is your nature. You are not a mind that has awareness. You are awareness that has a mind. And in that knowing, soft, deep, unforced, there is rest. Not the rest of exhaustion. Not the rest of surrender. But the rest of coming home. To the place you never left. To the truth you always knew, beneath the noise. To the light that needs no source. So as we come to the end of this journey, through paradox, through doubt, through the unraveling of everything familiar, we do not arrive at a conclusion. We arrive at this moment. Not as a concept. Not as a lesson. But as a living, breathing, feeling presence. And in that presence, there is no need for more. No need to seek. No need to know. No need to be. Just this. Just now. Just awareness. And as the silence grows, and the mind quiets, and the breath slows, you can let go. Not into darkness. Not into oblivion. But into the gentle, boundless openness of simply being. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of rest. And so, as the stars turn overhead, as the world continues its quiet turning, you can close your eyes. Not to escape. Not to hide. But to remember. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not separate. You are the awareness in which the universe appears. The silence behind the noise. The light behind the eyes. And that is enough. Good night.